one of the places I get stuck, really. You know, they're like, oh, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Okay, that's stupid. Why would you keep doing the same thing and think it's going to get any better? Well, out here, I'll just use the internet for an example. You know, I'll sit here and click upload and upload and upload and upload and upload, or I'll be looking at a web page that I really need to look at and it's not working, you know. And it's like, I will change nothing and all of a sudden it'll start working by itself. And it's got nothing to do with anything I'm doing here. It's just completely random. You know, it's very frustrating. You know, that in itself could get you down. I mean, I've had days where I had a really good day because I just absolutely ignored the internet and everything was fine, you know. But I'll work 2 weeks on a project and then 3 days on the video for the project. And then I finally get the project, you know, the project is done, the video is done, all I gotta do is upload it and, you know, so people can, you know, give me all the comments about all the things I did wrong. And it won't work. It just like, no, I'm not going to be on internet today. You know, I think sometimes my antisocial behavior is affecting affecting the phone. It's like, what? You're not even going to call people? I'm not going to work. I'm taking the day off. You know. Anyway. Well, okay. It's been 2 hours. The thing just bleeped, and for the first time, it's up to 1%. Maybe it'll work. It's just mind-numbing some days, you know. It's just, it was almost better 4 years ago when I first came out here, when I just said I don't have internet out here, but I was going to El Paso every day for work, and about halfway to work I would turn on the phone and it would just start working. You know, I was in the truck for 2 hours each way to work, you know, to work 2 hours. Coming home from work, after work, 2 hours to get home. Alright. So you know, if I had something like I needed to upload a video or I needed to download something, I would just set it up in the parking lot and then start driving home, and by the time I got home it was done, you know. Or there was times, you know, because you aren't supposed to use your phone at work anyway, so I would just set it up in the parking lot and leave it plugged into the truck and let the phone do its thing while I was working, and great, you know. Because I was getting paid to drive to get to work. Well, now I have no reason to go, so yeah. But there's been times out here, I mean, like if I get about 7 miles from here is where the phone will start working by itself without the booster. Out here I've got this Wii booster, you know, or Wii Boost, which, you know, is really cool. One of the viewers of the channel donated it to me, you know, which was like, okay, great. Probably 40% of the time it works just fantastically. It is, you know, the fact that I'm in a hole and I have very little signal, it works pretty good. And then it just randomly, I think the Wii booster is working. I think the phone is working because it'll start working by itself. But it's like, is there, you know, what's going on the other end at the tower? I have no idea. It's just, it'll work and then it won't work, you know. Sunrise seems to be a factor. Like, sometimes it just will not work for like half an hour before sunrise and a half an hour after sunrise. So we're just at that point after sunrise. So is it a factor of I'm getting interference because of the angle of the sun? You know, that's one thing that seems to be possible, but it's not consistent. You know, it's so weird. Yeah. 2%. Okay, now suddenly it's, you know, 8 o'clock, it's starting to work. I got up, when did I get up? Like an hour and a half early today. Yeah, I was up by 6. I've been purposely sleeping in until 7 because the sun doesn't even come up until after 7, so, you know, there's not a lot of reason for me to get up in the dark with no power, because what I mean, I could cook breakfast and then I'd sit here for 2 hours waiting for power and light so I can do anything, you know. And then I'm like, then I'm getting too much sleep, and it's messing with my head. I actually do better. If I get 6 hours of sleep, I do great. Well, what am I going to do for 4 hours after dark? Because the thing that I would do in the evening, this is, it's like infrastructure kind of thing. Yeah, this gets into the whole other bottleneck. If I had, well, if I had grid power, we'll just start with that. If I was hooked to the grid, which I don't want to do that, but if I had grid power, if I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning wide awake, I could just jump up, and I used to do that. I'd wake up and it's like, well, okay, so I'd, crawl over to the computer and turn it on, and I'd get some work done. I have a list of ideas that I'm trying to figure out. Now it's artificial intelligence, machine learning, for the robot, so the robot can, there's a process where the robot could look at a picture, and it doesn't have to be a robot, it could just be a computer. You can show the picture to the computer, the software looks at the picture, and it can identify, okay, this is a person, this is a tree, here's a dog, here's a coffee cup, right? And it draws a little square around each of the items in the picture. It's pretty cool. So thinking about it, if I want my robot to be able to drive around on the property, there's like 3 or 4 ways we can do it. I can actually remote control it, which you can do it the way that the guys fly the drones. You can put the goggles on, and you can see out at the front of the robot, and then you can just drive it as if you're in the robot, okay? Which is, it's totally legit, but I want it to be able to do it automatically without me doing it, right? I think that makes it more interesting. So, to do that, one of the things that I've been experimenting with, I can take my phone and I can record a GPS track walking around the property, and then I look at the map and it shows me a little line everywhere, every bush I walked around. It doesn't show me the bush, but it shows exactly where I walked. If I walk down the driveway in one wheel track and I come back on the other wheel track, it sees the difference between the two tracks that are 4 or 5, however far your tires are apart. So where I used to drive the truck, if I walk on one side and then come back on the other, it sees, okay, there's definitely a separation between the lines. Okay, so you can export that as a GPS file. I could then feed it to the robot. The robot would have its own GPS, and it would just follow the line. Okay, so, in a simple way, that might be it. I could walk on all the trails, and the robot would just know that this trail is robot friendly, and it'll just follow the trail. I mean, it doesn't know, it just follows where it's told to go. Okay, and that would be fine. But what would be really cool is if the robot could look through its little camera, and it could just say, okay, I'm looking forward, there's a bush in front of me, but it looks like there's no bush beside the bush. So it would just turn and then go around the bush and then go straight and then come back and follow its original path again, right? And all it has to do is to be able to say, okay, here's a bush, there's no bush here, go there. And it would be simple as that. I mean, I'm not a highly gifted programmer, but I have done some programming. And a lot of people are doing this. I mean, this is huge. Google and IBM and Microsoft and all the big people are doing it. The Department of Defense was experimenting with this for years already, driving their trucks across the desert. You had to have a driver in every truck. Well, if they're going between Supply Depot and wherever they're going, like, when they were doing Iraq and Afghanistan and all that, they had, they'd have one driver in every truck. Well, if they came under attack, that wasn't enough to defend themselves. So then they had to have at least 2 or 3 people in each truck. One guy to run the gun, right? Well, maybe you don't even worry about it too much. Maybe you just say, just send the truck without a driver. Well, if we lose the truck, well, we just get a new truck. Not a big deal. As long as you don't lose the driver, right? So what they were experimenting with is, could you have a convoy of trucks driving between bases out in the desert with autopilot? And then you could just have one operator like the drone guys, or you could have a drone flying over the convoy once in a while to make sure it's still going. Great. That would just free up people, eventually you get to the point that, like out here, when I was digging the big hole, I had a lot of time. I'd sit there and dream of the day that I could paint a circle on the ground and have the robot come in and dig the hole where the circle was. And I could be at work, when I was working. And like, man, how cool would that be? I'd come home, check on the robot. Oh, it's doing good. I'd maybe shovel, or, I'd sharpen the shovel forward and I'd turn it loose again, that would be the dream, Or when I was going to get the rocks, I'd jump, I'd grab my wheelbarrow and my shovel and I'd walk out and I'd find a place that there was a bunch of big rocks and I'd bring them back, But sometimes I would spend an hour digging out an area that had a bunch of rocks and I'd pull them all out and then I'd have to walk the rocks all the way back with the wheelbarrow and then come back and, maybe I'd get 2 or 3 trips or something like that. At the time, the rocks seemed important. I haven't really used the rocks very much, but it was, kind of a good thing to do for exercise when I was, when I was working. I'd come home and I'd want to go out and burn some steam for a while. But I always thought, it's like, the time I'm wasting taking the rocks back and forth, it's like, what if I could have the robot pull the wagon to where I wanted the rocks, and then it could dump the rocks, have a little dump bed, and then it could come back. Meantime, I'm doing the hard part. I didn't mind doing the hard work. I just wanted to make it faster or more efficient or something like that. So that's kind of where the robot, thing, at least for 10 years, I've been wanting to build a robot of some sort, just because I've always been interested in that. So this isn't something that suddenly I want to do it. It's like I have got piles of parts for the robot. So I just want to actually go through the process. And something that I remembered a couple of weeks ago, I was walking around out here in the desert, I feel like Moses or something like that. You go out and walk in the desert and suddenly you get inspiration or something. But get outside and get moving, and then you remember all the things, right? That famous speech when Kennedy said, "We want to go to the moon." And it was like, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And I don't remember the rest of the speech. I do have it on one of my videos. In fact, the introduction video for Mars Clipper, I included that speech as kind of a reminder why I'm doing this. So look for that. But for me, and it's like, I've seen other people do this. It's like, okay, they wanted to learn a skill, and so they take on a project because in the process of doing the project, they'll learn the skill, right? So, if you wanted to learn how to weld, you might decide, okay, you could sit there and weld pieces of scrap metal together for a few hours a night, but eventually it would just be a weird thing that you're doing, You don't sit there and practice drawing circles. You want to be an artist, you decide to start drawing something, right? So the same with the robot. If I can get this to work, I will learn so many things that I don't really know yet. For instance, I'm learning a CAD program, computer-aided design or drafting. I'm using FreeCAD. It's a free program, hence the name FreeCAD. It's available for Linux, Windows, Mac, I think. They're constantly updating it. There's a really big community that's working with it. It's all open source, and so people are creating for it. It's really a really neat program. And the way that open source software in general works is awesome. So you get a bunch of people that get excited about it. They're like, here's this other program, but we don't like them because it's, of some big company, and they're giving it to us for a price, or, they changed their licensing or something like that. And we're like, let's just go make our own. So they get together, and a few people that know how to program, and then everybody else throws in ideas what they want, and these guys, make it happen. So they've been doing this for years. So here's my chance. I can get in and I can learn how FreeCAD works, and I'm starting to make some of the parts in FreeCAD, and then I take the files from that, go through a couple other programs to do the conversion, and then I take that to the 3D printer. Okay, so I'm starting to learn how that process works. Okay, so that's designing in CAD. Later on, I would love to get, in addition to the 3D printer I have now, I'd love to get a CNC mill where I could take a block of aluminum, put it on the machine, take the part that I invented in FreeCAD, take it over there, and it carves out this part. Okay. People are doing that. This is not $1,000,000 stuff. This is $1,000 stuff, $100 stuff, some of it. You can get a little lathe and a little mill for $500, $1,000. Okay. And some of them you can add basically, it's like the CNC mill is basically a stronger version of the 3D printer. It's the same technology, just a little different way of looking at it. So the 3D printer adds things in layers. The CNC takes a block and carves away. Was it Michelangelo? He could see the angel inside the rock before he started carving. It's kind of like that. You're like, okay, just take away everything that's not the robot, and when you're done, here's this robot part, and you take it out and put it on the robot. Okay. So this is kind of the direction I'm looking at. I'm like, okay, I can learn design, I can learn manufacturing, essentially, or fabricating. I already have a handle on welding. I mean, I'm not necessarily a gifted welder, but I can stick two things together, and generally they work. Okay. Then we get into the software side. And that's really the secret sauce. Is, I can make the robot be radio controlled, and I can just sit there and drive it around. I can be looking at right now I'm looking. In fact, let me show you what I'm looking at most of the time. That might be Curiosity. I think that's Curiosity. One of the rovers on Mars. That's a picture of Mars. The robot did a selfie, essentially. So that is an actual real picture of Mars. Alright? So that's my desktop. So, I could be... Okay, make sure I didn't break the camera. I could be just randomly, I could just, I mean, it would be a fun thing anyway. People have, radio controlled airplanes and drones and RC buggies and all that kind of stuff. And, when I had the little radio controlled car, I'd take it outside and I'd drive it around. That was fun for a while, But to me, it's like video games. At some point, pretty early in life, I started to believe my dad that playing video games was a waste of time. And I just never got into it. I got a lot of people that are all excited about all these games, and I'm like, I couldn't get into it. I would, if I had a flight simulator, I loved those. I used to spend hours on the flight sims. I don't have one right now. Kerbal Space Program is something I will probably buy. There's a new version coming out. I might just wait for that. Yeah. If you know anything about, if you've ever seen, Scott Manley and sometimes Everybody Astronaut, Tim Dodd, they'll do a little video in Kerbal to explain a process. But the idea of Kerbal is you can make your own, you are creating your own space program. So you start off, you build a rocket, and then you go out and test it, and usually it explodes, and then you learn something from it, and you come back and rebuild it, and sometimes the failures are more fun than the successes, right? That's kind of the Kerbal experience. So, to me, it's like, if I can, if I can look at this thing, and I can build something that looks sort of like the Mars rover, and I can be out here driving around the property, that would be just like being on Mars, as far as I'm concerned. That's, to me, that would be the coolest thing ever, because I've been having Mars in my head since, what was the first Mars rover? Before we had Perseverance, Curiosity, and then Spirit and Opportunity were the two twins, and then there was a little tiny one, and I can never remember the name of that. But when they first started posting the pictures, some of the pictures they posted from that were 3D pictures. So if you had the red-blue glasses, you could actually see the 3D effect because it had two cameras, right? I don't see where they are right now, but I have a pair of those glasses, and the first time I put them on and I looked at Mars and you could feel like you were there, oh man, I was hooked. That's always been there. So Um, Side note, this doesn't look like Mars out here, but I can kind of imagine it, right? So the first time I came out here to the property after I had started making payments, I came out camping for a week, and I parked on the other side of the property. I was quite a ways from where I am now, but still on the same ranch. I mean, it's not huge, but it's, you know, far enough away. And I was sitting there next to the truck. I had rigged up a tarp so I had some shade, and I had a book that I had wanted to read. I had bought it and hadn't had time when I was working, so I'm like, you know, I'm going to read this book. Well, it's The Martian. So that might be part of it. I was reading The Martian out here, and I'd get to the end of a page, and I look up and I just stare out at the hills and everything like that, and that kind of linked it together. So I always kind of linked this place feeling like Mars, you know. Plus, I'm out here far enough, I can almost forget that there's other people, which is kind of cool. So not everybody's into that, but you know. Anyway, so you know, what can I learn in the process of doing this? You know, I can learn the design, I can learn the fabrication, I can develop the different systems, I can start to learn the programming, you know, learning machine learning, artificial intelligence, image recognition, object avoidance, or, you know, to be able to drive around a bush instead of running over it. And then all of the bits that hold that together. You know, software is pretty slick. I use the Raspberry Pis a lot for my day-to-day computer. That picture I just showed you of the Mars rover, that's on one of the Raspberry Pis. The Raspberry Pi was written, the reason they called it Pi, it's Pi, but it was actually written, it was created as a programming tool to learn Python. Python is a computer language. So it's made for Python. So I could have the rover essentially powered by a Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi could be the main brains of the rover, right? That's kind of the direction I'm looking. And I've seen a bunch of, you know, like there's Christopher over at Explaining Computers. There's Bill at DroneBot Workshop. I'll try to list some of these in the description. The Post-Apocalyptic Inventor has made some robots, but it seems like anybody watching his channel isn't really into the robots, and so he'll just do one once in a while and go back to whatever his normal format is. All of these are people that, if you're interested in this, check out, you know, what they're doing. It's like ways of combining, like, okay, there are so many off-the-shelf things right now that you can just go buy relatively inexpensively and make this work, right? DroneBot Workshop, one of the robots he was doing, he was explaining, you take your radio-controlled receiver that's like 50 bucks, you know, you can fly an airplane with it or whatever, and you can tie that to an Arduino, which is like $10 or something like that, really inexpensive. You use a little bit of programming, and then the radio controller can send a sequence to the Arduino interprets it, runs like essentially a macro. So for instance, I could say, okay, I could tell the robot, go forward 10 meters, and then let go, and it would do it, okay? And the robot would be sitting there thinking, okay, I want to go 10 meters, how big is my wheel? It would have all this formula figured out. So it would just say, okay, let's turn the wheels forward so many turns, and that'll get us 10 meters. Okay. And then when it gets there, it'll just stop. And it'll know it got that far because it's counting how many times the wheels turned. It's just a little encoder. This is not difficult stuff to do. It just takes a little bit of time. Okay. Then when it gets there, it'll just stop. One of the things I'm looking at is the motors can start and stop instantly, which puts a lot of torque on things, and if the robot is a little bit heavy, I'm going to start breaking stuff. But there was a thing in the Arduino, a module, what do they call those? Like a function. Ramp up and ramp down. And I was using that back in Austin, and I'm like, I'm thinking I need to learn this stuff, and like I did this stuff 5 years ago. I was making things 5 years ago that used some of these things. So let's say you want to ramp up and ramp down. Okay, so you just, every time it accelerates, it starts from zero, slowly accelerates, gets up to speed, slows down, and then it just cruises at that speed. The same way you would do if you're trying to drive your car smoothly, if a cop is behind you. So the robot could know how to do that. I mean, I could still have an emergency stop. If I looked out and realized it's about to run off a cliff, I could hit the thing and it would just slam on the brakes. But if it just allowed itself to speed up and slow down automatically, it would be very smooth. Which would be nice for, if it's got a camera on board and it could smoothly drive itself across the property. It would get this beautiful, flowing video instead of jerking like the little car was doing. The little car was terrible for being able to, drive smoothly. And the same with panning. If you wanted to have the camera pan across something, it could start from zero, slowly speed up, get to a certain speed, cruise across, and then when it got there, instead of just slamming into the end, it would slowly taper off and then stop. Right? So it would get this really nice cinematic kind of a shot. These are functions that other people have written. And a lot of the stuff is open source, freely available. You just learn how to find it. Why reinvent it? Somebody's already done it for you and they give it to you for free. All you have to do is say, if I write something based on what they did, like for instance, if I take the robot, when I get it all finished, if I decide I want to sell this as a product, I could just list open source things that I'm using. Some of the parts that I've found, you can just go find parts on places like on the internet, like Thingiverse and other places. People have created things in 3D that they just freely give you, and you can just download it and print it yourself. A lot of times you can do it for free. You can give the guy $1 tip if you want. Some of them you have to buy, but a lot of it is out there for free. So much of this is available. It's just, put all the little pieces together. And then if I create something of my own intellectual property, I could turn it around and I can give it back to the community, right? So even if I decided, okay, to me, the end goal, and I don't know if I'll get there, but even if I don't, what I learn in the process will be worth it. But to me, the end goal, if I can make this robot an actual working, functional robot that other people would use, I could sell parts kits, the mechanical parts, and then give the software away because it's based on other software that I've found for free. And so I feed it back into the community, and then other people can look at it and they're like, okay, they could maybe base something on what I've created and make something better, and then I could go back and I could take their update and improve my robot. That's open source.